My name is Severin Welcome. I live in Pembroke, Maine, on the shores of Cobscook Bay, and I'm the director of Greenhorns. We're one of the co-sponsors of this event and a whole series of educational events about the future of our bay and marine policy, ecology, various perspectives from around the world, trying to learn from other places that are dealing with similar issues to what we face here in terms of the needed reinvestment and animation of an economy, um, of natural resource economy that has seen bigger abundance in the past. And so that's kind of what animates this whole series, is trying to prepare ourselves for the work ahead and for good decision making and community practice. So the last speakers that we had were from other regions: Washington State, Alaska, British Columbia. Now we're joined by Don, who is in the United Kingdom and concerning himself with waters over on that side of the Atlantic, and he's been doing it for quite a while. So they have not that long each, and then a little dialogue together, and then dialogue with the attendees. So thank you very much for making the time, Don, to bring your perspective to this community here. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been. I'm going to try and share my screen. Is that
very good?
Is that me and Trey on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. I've been told to go for 25 minutes. That takes us up until about 7 o'clock. Is that 2 o'clock? Is that okay?
Proceed to the root.
Okay. So thanks for the invitation to speak. I'm going to talk a little bit about my background, a history of salmon farming in Scotland, a bit about my filming inside salmon farms, some of the impacts on fishermen, tourism, wildlife, some issues to do with what I call the sal mafia, and try and touch on a bit of the regulations of welfare, safety, environmental laws, and then wrap up with some consumer issues. So I've been campaigning for over 25 years. I'm English, but spent most of my working life in Scotland, also in British Columbia. I spent a lot of time campaigning against salmon farms in Scotland as what people refer to me as an activist, but most of the time spent in front of a computer. It was only in 2018 that I started filming inside salmon farms, and I opened up my eyes to the welfare nightmare of salmon farming. And I've filmed inside salmon cages in Ireland and the Faroes, and I'm going to film in other places with the Global Salmon Odyssey later this year and next year. I've worked with different green groups, predominantly environmental groups, but increasingly working together with welfare groups. If you put Don Staniford into Google, AI spews out Staniford's aggressive direct action tactics have made him the primary target of major multinational aquaculture corporations, resulting in a series of severe legal restrictions and mounting financial pressures. Sounds a bit scary, but in terms of SLAP suits, these are strategic lawsuits against public participation. I was involved in Canada against Cermaq. I'm currently embroiled in legal action against Faroese, Norwegian-owned Bakkafrost, and Norwegian giant Maui. I'll touch a bit about those later, but I view SLAP suits as a kind of badge of honor, like stripes. It is like going to war. You may have read a book by Doug France, and Catherine Collins called Salmon Wars. It is the resistance movement pushing back against big money, big sell money. And we've got lots of press in the UK and globally in relation to zombie salmon farms sourced from footage inside cages. There's an abolish salmon farming campaign in Scotland. I started as an academic at a university in the early 90s studying the environmental impact assessment of salmon farming, and then ended up being an environmental campaigner. So they call me the kayak vigilante. I kayak out to salmon farms and film inside the cages. I've also been a consumer vigilante and encourage others to boycott farm salmon and to tell your friends and family to boycott farm salmon. We go in front of supermarkets with huge screens playing video footage that we filmed inside salmon farms. There are other vigilantes out there. This is a guy in British Columbia, a fisherman, Centula. There's legal vigilantes. This is the Conservation Law Foundation in Maine, who are suing Cook for toxic discharges. This is in Maine. And I say that salmon farming has spread like a malignant cancer on our coasts, and we should rip it out. In British Columbia, we've got Alexandra Morton there and Ernest Alfred. They've done some excellent work where the British Columbian salmon farms, the open net pens, Justin Trudeau pledged to take them out of the water last year, 2025. It's been pushed to 2029. But if you take the salmon farms out of an area, and this has happened in Ireland, in Bertrowty Bay, the wild fish bounce back. This is a cartoon, I think, in an Eastern Canada newspaper or a Maine newspaper around the time, 10 years ago, when Cook was fined almost $500,000 for illegal use of toxic chemical cypermethrin that killed lobsters. So salmon farming is a toxic industry. If you just focus for a couple of minutes on Scotland, 99% of Scottish salmon is foreign owned, predominantly Norway, but also the Faroes, USA, Canada. USA is Cook. So you've got 5 companies controlling 99% of production. You've got high mortality. Some of it's certified as organic. I've also filmed just recently in Ireland. This is the Mail on Sunday in Ireland. Just last week, I've paddled out to farms, Maui farms, back of Ross farms. This is the Faroes with Neptune's pirates. You can see some of that are Operation Blood Salmon. I'll make this talk and slides available to everybody after this presentation, and happy to take questions and follow it up. My personal philosophy follows Gandhi, maxim: first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And Alexandra Morton, I was privileged, honored to spend time with Alex. We did the Get Out migration down Vancouver Island, 2010, mobilized people at the BC legislature, a mass rally of 5,000 people, demanding that salmon farms get out, go back to Norway. You can read her story and what she's done at Not On My Watch. There's various videos about Alexandra Morton. I encourage you to delve into what she's done. And then this great man, Ernest Alfred. So the drive for, and the reason that British Columbia has come under pressure to remove salmon farms from the ocean is from direct action. You've got in 2017, so nearly 10 years ago, you've got First Nations chiefs occupying Maui salmon farms, Cermak salmon farms. I think some people may have occupied the salmon farm for almost a year. So occupiers dig in for the protest. it's a fight, it's a battle. What they took it direct to Maui, to Sumac, these Norwegian companies, and said, "Get out of our waters. You're not welcome." They handed them eviction notices. So you may have seen Braveheart, but that's part of my strategy. I just run headlong towards the enemy. If you're in Boston later, you may see some of the Tartan Army at the World Cup football. In terms of what I do, it's a combination of direct action outside supermarkets, covert surveillance with a GoPro camera, public engagements, legal action. And Goliath was slain by David with a slingshot, a single small stone. I think you can down the Salmafia with a very small camera, a GoPro camera. There are other cameras available. I mount mine on a 2-meter telescopic pole. I encourage anyone to film inside farms. Even in Scotland, where I'm banned from filming inside Maui salmon farms, I can encourage others to film. I've gone out with German Geo magazine. The Daily Telegraph last year featured how King Charles has revoked the royal warrant for Maui. This was after video footage inside salmon farms. I've had victories in the Canadian courts. I've had the victory and the loss. The same one was to do with cigarette packets. I drew parallels between smoking and salmon farming. I kind of won and then I lost. I'm banned in Canada from saying, for example, salmon farming kills birds, but I'll show you later that salmon farming does kill birds. Salmon farming does spread disease. This is a blatant slap suit. I'll talk a bit about that later. I went to Norway after being removed from Canada for overstaying a visitor's permit. I went to Norway. Some of my actions are governed by Monty Python's Black Knight. It's just a flesh wound. I've had various losses along the way, and I'm going to continue working all around the world against salmon farming. If I'm banned in Scotland, I'll just go to Ireland or Norway or Canada. I teamed up with a great guy called Kurt Oddekalv, who's sadly no longer with us, in Norway about 13, 14 years ago. And I'll go through this really quickly, but I'm going to make this section available. The camera never lies, unlike the Salmafia. So you've got Maui, Cook, other companies saying how sustainable, how healthy, how welfare friendly they are. If you go into a supermarket, you'll see logos with the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, organic, whatever it is. But when you film inside farms, the greenwash is complete hogwash. It's not true. And you've got people in Maine, you've got Animal Outlook, who exposed Cook twice back in 2019 and just this year. You can see the video footage. This is a land-based Cook hatchery somewhere in Maine. It was just a month ago in the Guardian newspaper. So you can see that footage online. You can see footage from Animal Justice in Canada. They exposed welfare abuse inside Sustainable Blue. That's in Nova Scotia. That's a company that Yvonne Chouinard from Patagonia invested in. I'll talk a little bit about why I think land-based salmon farming is just as bad as open net cages a bit later. You've got CBC covering dead salmon. I think this was Maui. This might be in a documentary in Australia. Sea Shepherd were out there 7 or 8 years ago filming. And my work in Scotland, which started in 2018, was because of the pioneering work of Alexandra Morton. She took First Nations chiefs out to salmon farms. She filmed on whether it's a GoPro or another camera. She put it inside the farms. You can see her video footage at Hard Evidence on YouTube. Read her book. Pamela Anderson, the Baywatch lady, also filmed. I think David Suzuki may have boarded a farm, and it's shocking stuff. You've got tumors, disfigured, unhealthy farm salmon. And this was all over Canadian TV. This is what led to the ban on salmon farming in the ocean. You've got people filming and occupying. And then in 2018, Alexander Morton, John and Jane Doe, except Alexander Morton, were banned from 15 meters from Maui farms. But the law is different in Scotland. I'll talk a little bit about that. You had similar work in Norway by Mikkel Froden. He swam out, snorkeled out, swam out to a Greek salmon farm in Norway. He was convicted, had to pay a fine, but his footage was on Swedish television. And he said, it was my duty as a journalist to inform the public about the severity of the issue. So there's a moral imperative in Scotland. We've got Corin Smith, who's filmed inside Scottish salmon farms. His footage was on the BBC. Again, he says he used to be a sheep farmer. He's not a squeamish kind of guy, but never in my life have I witnessed such extensive animal suffering. So again, he's compelled to film inside farms. And Sir David Attenborough, who I think turned 100 quite recently, used some of the footage from Corin Smith in the video from Wildfish, making statements about salmon farming. You've also got filming in Tasmania by the Green Britain Foundation, finding very similar, shocking, deformed frankenfish. You've got footage leaked by whistleblowers of dead fish. And then in Iceland, you've got Viger, who goes in a kayak like I do. And she says, I was paddling alongside salmon pens and I noticed dead birds. This made me think and look more closely into this industry. So she went out with the Spiegel International, the German media, and they did a story on zombie salmon in Iceland. This is the shocking fish that's kind of a poster child for welfare abuse inside salmon farms. And you can follow Viger on Instagram, Viger Gretard's.dear. And then in Scotland, you've got the heroic Jamie Moyes, who went out with Italian television a couple of years ago, and Italian media, Corriere della Sera, and filmed dead fish at a Maui salmon farm. And he went out recently to another Maui farm. I observed blind fish. We should respect these fish and abolish salmon farming. He's the guy behind Abolish Salmon Farming. You got video footage from Dale Vince, the Green Britain Foundation, Ecotricity. Again, you've got these fish with missing faces. You've got buried fish and Netflix's Seaspiracy. You've got underwater footage in Clayoquot Sound. You've got underwater footage from Tavish Campbell. You've got blood discharges from salmon processing plants, leaking viruses into the ocean. This was on CBC News and BBC News. You've got protests where the crap, the waste under salmon farms is deposited back, given back to Cermaq and other companies. You've got video footage of herring and other wild fish trapped inside the cages. Watershed Watch did a great report on trapped wild fish inside the cages. I've climbed up trucks full of dead fish, organic salmon farms in Ireland. So you can look at this footage, and there's a video and photo library at salmonmediahub.org. I encourage you to use that, to look at that, to pilfer that. You can download the footage. It's all free. The footage must not be used to promote salmon farming, including closed containment and land-based salmon factory farming. I'll come to a bit of that. I'll skip through this section, but there's other information through Freedom of Information. This is how I started in Scotland. I did a Freedom of Information request to the Scottish government. Lawyers from the industry tried to stop disclosure of photographs, but I finally got the evidence, and that was the justification, the probable cause for me to go into salmon farms. And I've been filming ever since, but it's horrific. It's a welfare nightmare. Just look at the lice, the welfare abuse, the head damage, the death crowns. You've also got stuff from Maine. I think this is from Tremont on, I think that's Arcadia National Park, South Maine maybe. And you've got die-offs from Cook. Again, that was sourced from Freedom of Information requests with environmental officials and then very good journalists like Lincoln Milstein. You've got other horrific instances exposed by the Green Britain Foundation of birds trapped. Again, that was sourced through Freedom of Information, 532 incidents of trapped birds, red-listed species. This is an image of video footage I took at a Maui salmon farm they're trying to ban me from in Loch Etive. So where there's a hit, there's a writ. There's legal pushbacks from the industry. They don't want this footage out there. They don't want the photographs out there. Their lawyers have tried to block disclosure of photographs. They've taken me to court. Maui launched legal action in Scotland in 2021 after huge media coverage on the Mail on Sunday. There's coverage in Seaspiracy on Netflix. And one very disconcerting issue is we've been spied on. Myself and Corin Smith discovered that there was spying. There was a tracking device under his car. You might think that's quite ironic. I've lost and won various lawsuits. So this is the Guardian newspaper in the UK last year. It was a US edition. Tom Burgess, an investigative journalist, found out that we'd been under private surveillance by a guy called Yuri Lopatinski, who owned at the time Bakkafrost, another company that's suing me. And again, the Guardian last year reporting on the lawsuit where Bakkafrost wants to have an exclusion zone 15 meters around the farms. So it's time to slap back against the industry. Supermarkets are pulling the plug based upon video footage. So there is a direct link between surveillance, media coverage, and supermarket action. And consumers are revolting against Scottish salmon in particular. This is a toxic, noxious industry. There's in-feed toxic treatments, emamectin benzomate, cancer-causing chemicals, formaldehyde, pesticides marketed as medicines, deltamethrin. This is a toxic industry. Salmon farming with a pH. I've campaigned outside the Scottish Parliament, outside supermarkets, outside conferences. Severin asked me briefly to talk about cooking sections. They won an arts prize a couple of years ago. They did an exhibition in the Tate Britain Gallery on the deceptive reality of salmon. That they used the Salmo fan. And in Peter May's book, The Black Lock, he writes, you know that lovely pink color of the salmon we buy in the supermarket, fake, like Donald Trump and his phony tan. But salmon farming is a bad joke. It's no laughing matter. You've got cartoons, and this is the key one for me. We need to tell the world what's happening. My clients are the fish. Fish can't speak. They don't have a voice. We need to be the voices of the defenseless. These are sentient beings trapped, crammed in cages. There's Documentaries like Netflix's Seaspiracy and You Are What You Eat, I encourage you to watch. Read books like Toxic by Richard Flanagan, The New Fish. There's a French book on Poisson nommé Saumon. I think that's kind of a pun on a streetcar named Desire, a poison called Salmon. You've got the excellent Toxic book. You've got Filming in Tasmania right now. I'll just, before wrapping up, say some words on closed containment. I don't think there's any right way to do the wrong thing. We shouldn't be farming salmon at all. These are golden eagles, albatrosses of the sea. And even if you buy the argument that salmon farming on land or in closed systems eliminates escapes and impacts on wild fish, the lesser of two evils is still evil. And from a welfare point of view, land-based salmon farming could be even worse. There's a report by Food Rise called Pulling the Plug on Land-Based Salmon Factory Farms. I encourage you to read it. Abigail Penny from Animal Equality UK says it's a grim, overcrowded, completely unnatural. It will simply create an entirely new set of welfare and environmental risks. Land-based salmon farming is not the answer. It's an environmental ticking time bomb. It still drains the world's oceans of wild fish. We're stealing precious protein. Dr. Daniel Pauly from the University of British Columbia says we're robbing Pedro to pay Paul. So we're stealing precious protein, anchovies, small fish that we could eat to fuel the expansion of salmon farming. Dr. Patricia Madriloff in Peru says that we should be having fish meals, not fish meal fed to farm salmon. We're stealing krill from penguins, from whales. And then Maui has the gall on Comet Relief Day to donate 40 pence a packet of Scottish Superior super salmon to tackle food poverty. But salmon farming is a food security nightmare. It's not organic either. Organic salmon is an oxymoron. I wrote a paper on this, an argument on this, an essay, 2001, so 25 years ago. That's how old I am. And then now you've got the Soil Association being pressured by the Green Britain Foundation to pull the plug on organic. That might happen very, very soon. And that's based upon video footage shot inside organic salmon farms. You've got Dale Vince pushing that. You've got Guy Singh Watson, fan of Riverford Organic Farm, saying that salmon farming is not organic. It's a toxic industry. It's greenwashing. So finally, we all need to be consumer vigilantes. We need to have a zero tolerance for salmon farming, no compromise in the defense of wild fish. And organic salmon farming doesn't exist. Ocean-friendly salmon farming does not exist. However much you regulate the industry, it's not going to make a material difference. We need to rip out the cages. We need to have regulations to ban salmon farms. You need to go into supermarkets like Alexandra Morton did. You can watch the film Salmon Confidential, an excellent documentary. Friends don't let friends eat farm salmon. We should be revolting. We should be revolting against this industry. And locals, tourist operators, fishermen up and down the Scottish coast, the Norwegian coast, Tasmanian coast are revolting against salmon farms. We've seen that in British Columbia with First Nations. It can happen in Maine. It's happening in Eastern Canada. You need to fight and tell everyone what happens on side salmon farms. So you can contact me at salmonfarmingkills@gmail.com. And I'm happy to provide the information in these slides to anyone.
Great work. Wow. Amazing. Thank you, Don. Trey, those are big shoes. High energy shoes to step into.
Yeah. Yeah, Don, thank you for a great presentation. So I'm Trey Angera. I'm a member of Springtide Seaweed. So we're the largest organic seaweed farm in Maine. We're the fourth largest aquaculture leaseholder in the state. We raise five different species of seaweed. We are operate the only uh, urchin hatchery in North America, and we are farming, feeding a lot of our seaweed to urchins and developing green sea urchin products. We also we have scallops, mussels, and clams on our farm as well. Um, my business partner founded the company, Sarah Redmond, and unfortunately she couldn't speak today, but I think she's eavesdropping. She's a fly on the wall. It's harvest season, and it's one of the busiest times of year for us. But Sarah really started the seaweed aquaculture thing in Maine. She was very active. She created when she was at Sea Grant, she created the Shared Waters program. And when I met her in 2017, I was working on a project by Greenwave and one of their companies to start to build a seaweed processing facility. So I traveled to and basically visited every seaweed farm in New England at the time. I don't think I missed any. And when I came up to Sarah here in Frenchman Bay and went out to her farm, I was just, blown away by the sophistication and what she was doing. And I told her, you're doing a great job, but you're a terrible business person, so maybe you should bring in a partner. And she did. And we've been running it as a business. We're the only full-time seaweed company, and it's been around since 2017. We're not a seasonal business. We do this year round. And our core values, though, are a values-driven company, and that's to support working waterfronts. I mean, one of the reasons we do this, um, we don't get rich doing it, I'll tell you that. But the idea is to kind of be a role model to other farmers, fishermen who want to transition to aquaculture and have some level of success and do it in a responsible way and support their families and support local communities. So that's our big thing. So I want to thank Severin um, and Don for this opportunity because, it's very rare today that you have two people speaking, one who is really fighting the good fight against aquaculture, and then somebody who's in the aquaculture business and is doing everything they can, which is me. I'm doing everything possible to make aquaculture better. I think Don's work is like a conscience to the industry. It it motivates those in the industry to do a better job. I think what he does is so important in basically keeping us honest. We're fortunate that most of our species, uh, are not extracted. I mean, we don't feed them anything. They live off, plankton and other things in the water, microalgae. So we don't really have any feed issues. So we don't have some of those complications. And I really think, but it's important to realize too that, um, and this is debatable, obviously, and that's why we're having this conversation. Is we have a population that needs to be fed, and we have people on the waterfront that need to make a living. And so I understand why salmon aquaculture exists. And I grew up in the meat business, so I spent a lot of my time, even as a child and all through my adult life, in abattoirs. So I spent a lot of time in slaughterhouses. I've seen a lot of things. If you eat chicken or beef or whatever, the photos that Don provided, I mean, there are equally graphic photos that you could find in any of those industries. Um, so the bottom line is if we farm any living creature for food, you're going to see this sort of abuse. You're going to see this sort of disease. You're going to see this sort of malformities. We've all heard of avian flu. I mean, thousands and thousands of birds that had to be killed because they were sick. I mean, so it's a nuanced, in my mind, it's a nuanced conversation and a nuanced difference. Um, I do know, like, a certain amount of the population of wild salmon are have deformities and are attacked by sea lice. What happens to them though is they're in the wild, they're eaten by other species. I mean, if you're a weak salmon in nature, some other fish is going to eat you. So I don't want to minimize the the issues of salmon farming, but I also don't want to minimize the potential for activists to make a difference so that animal welfare is, placed forefront. Um, Here in Frenchman Bay, not too long ago, there was American Aqua Farms, Norwegian company, wanted to come and put in actually one of the largest salmon farms ever proposed in North America, and I think in Norway as well. Um, and they were doing it basically. I'm looking out my window at Cadillac Mountain in Acadia National Park. Between Cadillac Mountain and where I am sitting would have been the farm that they were proposing. That farm was very interesting because I was wondering, like, how did this farm come up? And I realized that, people that we think we should trust, we can't trust. So Maine and Company, which is a pseudo nonprofit, quasi nonprofit that promotes business in Maine, was actually the one who promoted coming to Frenchman Bay. So people who are supposed to have the benefit of the people of Maine and heart were not involved. NOAA was in support of the project. The governor's brother was working on the project. I mean, there was tremendous efforts to get this project approved. The company itself would host these kind of meet and greets sort of things where they'd give you a lobster roll and chowder, and they'd wine and dine you and have a presentation on how they're going to do it better than any other farm. In reality, it was the technology that had never been tested, never developed, and would have released so many nutrients into the water that I think it would have destroyed Frenchman Bay. But fortunately, the fishermen originally thought, like, hey, this isn't going to be bad. They were actually taking the Norwegians out for tours to find a site. But as people started asking questions and seeing the presentations and the scope of things, the fishermen were very much turned off. We were very much turned off. We are organic farm, and that farm would have put our organic certification at risk because it would have been a major discharge point and would have made us unable to keep our organic certification. So the fact that, folks you think are your friends, they're not your friends. Maine has always been an economy based on exploitation of resources, whether it's mining, lumber, or fisheries. And that mindset is still here and present. The mindset is not about preserving the environment. The mindset is not about improving our communities and working waterfronts. It's about pure economic development at whatever cost. So after these things, the fishermen got against it. And then people in the community, unfortunately, or fortunately for us, unfortunately for them, Frenchman Bay is bordered by some very affluent communities, Bar Harbor, Winter Harbor. So, I mean, just people with tremendous wealth. And they formed opposition to it. They formed an organization called Frenchman Bay United. They were able to raise a tremendous amount of money. They were able to hire lawyers. They were able to commission environmental studies, circulation studies, to show how the nutrients will be distributed and harm the ecosystem here. They identified areas in Frenchman Bay that are unique. It's one of the few areas where small red shrimp breed, where other species breed, reproduce, and they were able to fund that. They were able to produce all sorts of interesting things. I mean, I have one of their postcards here. And the signs went over everywhere in the community. People started to protest. There was a giant flotilla where fishermen and other concerned people went out and had a flotilla out to where the site of the farm would have been to protest. There, it was just amazing. They pushed all the buttons. They made DEP instead of doing things, on the QT. They made him have public process. And eventually, the project was killed by DMR because they couldn't demonstrate a source of sustainable salmon spawn. So they couldn't find juvenile salmons that would have met their criteria, so that their DMR application for a lease was denied. And I'm glad it was, not only for Frenchman Bay, not only for our local community, but all the money that they had raised to fight to fight this farm. They distributed it to nonprofits, including ours, which was the Maine Seaweed Exchange. So we were happy to get some of the proceeds of that. But I have to tell you, it was one of the only times I've ever seen the National Park Service, who manages Acadia, come out publicly and oppose a commercial project. And it was the first time that the Secretary of the Interior actually came to Winter Harbor and spoke and said that she was concerned about the project. So grassroots efforts and are tremendously effective. I mean, they have stopped the farm that was proposed for another town in Belfast, a land-based farm that's been killed. There actually no new big salmon farms have been approved in Maine. So the bottom line there is, if you bind together, like the work that Don's doing, it draws attention to things, and it just has to be balanced, right? But I think if we hold people to the grindstone, they will eventually come to the right decision. But if people don't get involved, that will not happen. And it's really nice to have money. If you don't have money, your voice is not going to be heard. So I think it's really important that if you are trying to oppose any project, you need to have the resources to do the science that gives you credibility. You need to have the resources to get the attention of the regulators. So I think that's really important. Someone asked that I share some of my experience in the seaweed industry, which has kind of been a major boom and bust. The seaweed industry was originally promoted by Green Wave, which was a nonprofit, and it really was promoted as, hey, for $10,000 and a boat, you can make $100,000 a year. That argument was used by a company called Ocean Approved. They changed their name to Atlantic Sea Farms to raise $16 million in venture capital funding to create a ecosystem of lobster farmer fishermen who have these seasonal leases, and they would sell their seaweed to Atlantic Sea Farms, which was going to sell that in national distribution with consumer packaged goods, slaws, kimchi, smoothie cubes, all these things. The problem is, it was promoted as a way to promote and support the working waterfront. But what it was is really just exploitation, very similar to what you see with chicken farms. Tyson, Purdue, they don't own any farms. They get people to farm for them. And the environmental impacts of those farms are horrendous, but it never gets back to Tyson or Purdue. And so in this case, Atlantic Sea Farms got all these farmers and did all the paperwork for them and had this narrative that was supposed to be great. And the reality was that they got leases, which were seasonal leases. So right now, Atlantic Sea Farms has gone out of business because they were unable to sell the product. They promoted the farmers because they needed to prove to their investors they had supply, but they failed to actually develop a product that the market wanted. So now all these farmers, I'm like, hey, wouldn't it be great if you could grow urchins? Because you grow seaweed, you can feed the urchins, it'd be a great pivot for you. But they can't, because they all got leases that they have to take their gear out of the water in May. So they can't keep their gear in the water year round. If you can't keep your gear in the water around, there's no place for the urchins to live. Furthermore, Atlantic Sea Farms told everybody to get experimental leases. So these are a special type of lease. It's a more streamlined process to get it instead of a regular lease. And unfortunately, you can't change the species on these. So you couldn't go in and say, I got an experimental lease to grow seaweed. You can't go in and say, I want to grow urchins now. So all these farms are now useless. It was a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme where the farmers were duped, the state was duped, the resources of DMR were really stretched to try to process all these aquaculture lease applications for what? For a company that was smoke and mirrors, and now all these farmers can't transition to anything. And all those leases are essentially worthless. So, we have to be really careful. Greenwave has a budget. They raised over $9 million last year. So they have a budget of $9 million. The total farm gate value of harvest in last year was around 50,000. And in Alaska, where Greenwave is also active, it was like 240,000. So you have less than $500,000 in farm gate value, all supported and promoted by a nonprofit that generates $9 million in income. Their bread is buttered by creating this fallacy that aquaculture is going to save the world and seaweed aquaculture is the way to do it. Now, when it realized that you can't use a lot of the seaweed for food because it's too high in iodine and there's no way to scale a business with it. Now they're telling all these seaweed farmers, oh, just keep on growing seaweed. We'll turn it into fertilizer. I hate to tell you, but you just don't make a product and go out and say, oh, I'm going to sell some fertilizer. Farmers already have sources for fertilizer. They already have a supply chain. To develop a new supply chain source, a new entry into the market, takes a lot of time and money. And that's not happening right now. I think the moral of my story is, and I'm following along with suggested talking points from Severin, which I appreciate very much. Is there a positive message here? Well, the positive message is folks like Don and others are keeping aquaculturists honest. I don't agree with getting rid of salmon farms. What I do agree with is making the people who grow salmon make sure that animal welfare is top and center in their values and that they protect the environment and they do the right thing. I think that the future for fishermen and others who want to transition into aquaculture, I think there still is an opportunity. I think it needs to be measured, though. I think if you can get a year-round lease, we have a package that we even sell to people. It's like, we'll provide all the seed, we'll provide you juvenile urchins, and we can set you up in the urchin business. We can set you up in the scallop growing business. But you're not going to go make $1 million. And right now, there isn't a path to even support your family from aquaculture on the scale that we're talking about. And I think that's where, if you get into aquaculture, the reason we've been around and we've been successful is that we take control of the whole process. So we create products, we grow the seaweed, we sell the seaweed as an ingredient to other companies like nutraceuticals, food products, but we develop our own products. We go to market. We have we now sell live urchins. We make dried uni products, uni dust, which is a lemon, seaweed, dried uni seasoning that can be used on oysters. It's great. Instead of using lemon, you can just put this right on. You can put it on fish. We have a bunch of seasonings. We are helping other farmers get involved in the business. But if you don't control the whole supply chain right now, it's not like fishing where you catch it and you take it to the dock and sell it to somebody, because that's not going to happen. So I think those are the opportunities. And Severin, I'll ask you, did I cover everything I was supposed to cover? Severin's taking it down.
just can't figure out her buttons. That's okay. Well, I feel like the work you've done with the Maine Seaweed Exchange, as in terms of educating people coming in as entrepreneurs, feels of relevance, because here in Cobscook Bay and even Machias Bay and even Chandler Bay and even Passamaquoddy Bay, there are not, because it's cold water, so people will say oysters take so long to grow, but it isn't a place where there is smaller owner operator type aquaculture at this time, and that feels like a place of opportunity. So I guess one question would be your experience in kind of mentoring, facilitating, supporting the young people in sustainable aquaculture. You made the good point. These companies want to do all the paperwork for you, or you're just dealing with a dealer or the equivalent of a chickenization. And I think you're doing a beautiful job of helping people become entrepreneurs and embrace the complexity that it takes to be both retail, wholesale, production. Do you want to talk about how that those classes work, or what the throughput has been, or what the results have been for other people?
Yeah. Oh, sure. So the Maine Seaweed Exchange is a 501(c)(3) that we formed to do aquaculture education. We've trained over 300 farmers now globally. We've had people come from Europe, from Australia, New Zealand. We do a lot of education programs in Canada. And so we do have these programs that, you know, we just lay it out the way it is. We don't sugarcoat it. We have no vested interest in you starting a farm and not making money or not being happy or not knowing what's going on. So our interest is that you go in this with your eyes open, you have realistic expectations, and you plan ahead. We always, our classes focus on, okay, you want to grow something, that's great. If you want to sell it, you have to figure out what your supply chain is. That's not automatic. So when we do our classes, we spend a lot of time on not only how to farm, but how to get your product into the supply chain. Anyone who's listening or interested, we have people call, and they say, hey, I'm interested in this. I said, well, let's get 4 or 5 people together and we'll do the class. I mean, we have a full day program. We have a 3-day program. What's nice is in our facility, we bought an old cannery. So we have everything here. We have drying facility, milling facilities. We have our hatchery and nurseries here. We can do wet processing. We do all our blending for our seasonings. We do all our packaging. So we can do the full range of products here. And so when you come here for a class, you see it all. If the weather's good and, you can may even go to the farm and see how we lay that out. So I think all those elements, we think that's really important. The main thing is sometimes you take these classes like the Shared Waters program now, or these Green Wave classes or whatever, and you think like, wow, I can do something. And you can grow. Anybody can grow stuff in the ocean. The question is whether you're growing it well, you're getting the are you, I see pictures all the time of seaweed farmers, and they're holding up their seaweed that they just harvested, and it's really pathetic, sickly seaweed, but they don't know it because they're new. All their farmers are new. They don't have any knowledge. They don't have any, in land-based stock agriculture, if a soybean farmer is having an issue, they call their dad or their uncle or their grandfather. I mean, they've been, this generational knowledge. In aquaculture, most of the farmers in Maine have like 3 to 5 years experience and no formal training and no established resources to go to. So I think it's really important that you get a balanced education. I think many people of the 300 farmers we've trained, I'd say a good number of them took the class and decided not to become a farmer. We've done the same. We've done classes for investors. And again, a large number of the investors said, yeah, I thought this was more advanced. There was more, there was something more here. And they decided not to. But for everyone who said no, there's a few people that said yes, and they have been doing it, and they're making their own products, and they're selling them locally, or they're getting them to local restaurants, and it's not necessarily a business yet, but they're learning the skills that if, demand ever did pick up, if there was opportunities, they could do that. And in the meantime, they have a little bit of side income, and they're building awareness about how you can do things in a sustainable fashion.
Thank you, Trey. Thank you, Don. I wanted to give you a chance to reflect back between each other before I do have more things written down. Anything that you wanted to respond with, Don?
I was at the Real Farming Conference in Oxford, in England, in January, and I was on a panel with a seaweed farmer in Wales, and it was a interesting mix, just like it is today. The good side, the lower trophic level side of aquaculture, the environmentally friendly side of aquaculture that doesn't require feed inputs, versus the toxic nature of salmon farming, carnivorous finfish farming. And it's an interesting juxtaposition. One's the right way to do things, and one's the wrong way. And I thank you for bringing us together. And it's extremely interesting, and I love seeing the faces in the room on the Zoom. Sebastian Bell, and we've got the PR guy from Cook. We've got numerous employees of Cook and Maine Aquaculture present, watching, and I'd love a dialogue. And I'll be filming inside some Cook salmon farms very soon, so I'll be sharing that footage, and you can see the footage shot in Cook's Maine salmon farm, shot by Animal Outlook. They had an undercover operative in there, I think last year in 2019, so you can see that. And I challenge Cook and other companies to put the footage online, do 24/7 CCTV footage. If you've got nothing to hide, then why don't you put your farms so people can see it? I think people can see the seaweed farms on the floor. They can see that there's no chemical inputs. They can see there's nothing really going on that's bad. We challenge the industry to come clean and show us what you're doing.
Well, and the challenge I heard in Trey's talk was a challenge to the philanthropy and venture capital and kind of the full ecosystem of Maine institutions that are trying to facilitate a blue economy or marine economy, and that are accompanying aquaculture roadmap view of the world that privileges foreign investment and size. And if those $9 million to generate a good story that doesn't even make that much income for Mainers were flipped, and you said, we're going to invest those millions to have a marine policy vision that is Maine for Mainers, for the benefit of the water, for the benefit of incoming generations, that was, instead of trying to do the paperwork for people, helping them do the paperwork, and developing diverse and resilient and sustainable sector. I will say, as a young farmer, I moved to Maine because it was the highest per capita young farmers in the whole country. And that's to do with the institutions, support institutions that were here. Also, that the land was cheap, and the economy was down, and the farm sizes were small, and the summer market was strong. I mean, there's a lot of elements of why you have the highest per capita young farmers starting businesses in Maine. But the Maine food economy, the Maine lobster, the Maine beer, the Maine tourism, the Maine real estate, the Maine public health, the Maine organic consumers, the Maine hunters and fishermen, the Maine moms, those are some powerful market demographics who I think would be in support of a Maine for Mainers marine policy. So I think part of the framing, that since we're getting better at being overwhelmed by industry voices. So I just wanted to make a little preamble before it got too hot, because I know we have Braveheart on the line, and Trey doesn't mind conflict either. But I think at the bottom of the day, at the bottom of the sea, at the bottom of our hearts is a goal which we share, which is to be here with the ocean and to enjoy the ocean and to work from the ocean and to produce food. And so if we were to think constructively about how to shape a marine policy that worked for us. So we have the history of the paper companies and the dams and the PFAS and blocking the fish from going up the rivers and the forage fish. In the case of our St. Croix River, the DFO estimated 100 million alewives were returning every year, and the Passamaquoddy would light fires along the shore to welcome the fish up. I mean, the magnificent marine productivity of this ecosystem. Uniquely here in this part of the North Atlantic, we have the equipment for marine abundance. And what would it take? What kind of an investment? What kind of considered approach? How could the ecosystem of institutions, instead of facilitating boom after bust, after VC, after Norwegian company, invest in a Maine for Mainers marine policy? Because I would love to work constructively on that project. Okay, that was a little long. Sorry. Now what do we do? Now we talk amongst ourselves. Do you want to respond with one more thought, Trey?
Oh, the only couple of thoughts I had were I was glad to see Don as a Monty Python fan. I am Braveheart fan, so both popular with me. And I do wish I was as eloquent as you are, Severin. You always have a way of summing things up in a very articulate and compelling fashion. And Don mentioned that Sebastian and some folks from Cook are on the line. I'd say, hi, Sebastian. I don't see where you are, but good to see you again. And from the folks at Cook, I just wanted to share that we did a project on some fallow Cook pens growing dulse about 2 years ago. So we went up and we seeded dulse on some pens. And now that we're doing urchins, I invite all the Cook folks to, invite us to grow some seaweed around your pens and get some urchins in there to keep the pens clean. I got some ideas here and how to clean up aquaculture. But yeah, I think the best thing that we can do is, open it up to people and hear what they really think and what they want to do. Because, we are working on a bunch of projects. We're working on a project with the Passamaquoddy as well. I think Mainers are independent and resilient, and they don't take outside influence well. So I think we need to get people to trust the process, trust in their own, they have to believe it. They have to believe in it themselves. Otherwise, they're never going to act on it. And if we can provide them the tools to do that and the education and knowledge to do that, I think, we could have a very vibrant aquaculture industry in Maine that's built on a foundation of respect for the environment and our communities.
I think, Paul, I think we had a ringer in the room because I think Paul Molyneux was going to ask a good question. Do we want to start out with the people who are in present, Ashley, and then we could move to questions coming from the chat?
Sure. Does anybody here have any questions?
Yeah.
Sure. Actually, I might just come closer just to the microphone. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just got a quick remark for Don and Trey both. But first for Trey, I really appreciate the you coming on and open this thing up, and while you emphasize on the good and the bad thing about aquaculture, and that's great. That's great for us as fish farmers to look at it and try to improve. And then it's really, really good. Don, I see, from all the footage that you shared with us and from the dialogue that you have said, but honestly, it's not all credible to me. because from the one of the comments you made about the famous David Attenborough, he had you mentioned that he said that fish farming is really bad for the extent of the wild fish and the ecosystem. However, that's not exactly what he said. He contributed that to the poorly regulated salmon farming, and also in grossly and majority of the climate change and the overfishing. And I didn't see you stating that. And that, to me, you're exposing the fish farms, but you're hiding the fact that there is other contributors to this. And that really, that doesn't sit well with us at all. Thank you.
Any response there from anybody? Yep. Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, the full quote. Obviously, I was trying to cram a lot in. Sir David Attenborough, dams blocking their rivers, overexploitation, pollution of the water, the spread of parasites, diseases, and fish escaping from open cage salmon farms. All these, together with the inevitable effects of climate change, are threatening their very survival. So that's the full quote from that Mail on Sunday article.
Well, one of the questions about was referred to there is the poorly regulated, and I think it is valid since the kind of one of the triggers for this series is the fact that the leases Cook holds in Maine waters, which I believe are 23 lease sites, not all of which currently have pens on them. And so those renewals are basically not having public hearings, but there is a public comment process available to us as citizens of Maine, whose waters are being administered by the Department of Marine Resources. So Cook got their way in that their public hearings are not happening, but there's still plenty of opportunity to give feedback. And so the question is about the regulators. And so the question for Don and really Trey, because he has kind of industry perspective from meat industry about the underregulation, the supersizing, the kind of corporate structures that undergird or define this issue. So for instance, if you say, well, what about an artisanal or small scale salmon farm or that kind of question versus does it, there's only one company operating in the leases that were antecedent companies where there were 3 and there were 6, or same thing in Scotland if it, the majority of the industry is now owned by Norwegian companies. Can you describe some of the character of ownership, investment, and regulation that define this industry? And is it necessarily the case? Like, why is that oyster farms are mostly owner-operator in Maine, mostly employ less than 20 people, and have great demand for their product, but at a much smaller scale? That's a question for both Don and Trey.
If I can jump in, this is just for Scotland. In terms of environmental regulations, the Scottish EPA recently fined Scottish sea farms £25,000. But prior to that, I don't think there's been a fine for breaching environmental regulations for 15 years. The former head of regulation at the Scottish EPA left about 7 or 8 years ago to join the salmon farming industry. There's a revolving door between the environmental regulator and the industry where members of staff go from the Scottish EPA to work for Maui or Scottish sea farms. And then in terms of welfare regulations, welfare laws, they're supposed to be policed in Scotland by the Animal and Plant Health Agency, but they don't really bother to inspect or visit salmon farms very often. Maybe there's about 218, 219 salmon farms in Scotland. The visits in some years maybe in single digits. So there's a lack of surveillance, a lack of regulation. But if you speak to the industry, they'll say that the most tightly regulated, most heavily regulated industry in the world, and the Scottish salmon farmers are lobbying for less regulation. But I would advance the argument that the regulations are very poor, and those that do exist are not being followed by the industry.
Well, I'll respond a little bit. Don, I have to tell you that I feel the same as the Scottish salmon farmers. I feel terribly overregulated. I feel that the regulations are increasing, but most importantly, I feel they're not rationally based. I think they're very reactive. I think, it almost feels like, herding cats. There's all these competing interests, and people are always trying to advance their interests, but there's no adult in the room to say, look, let's look at this on at the 30,000 foot view. Let's look at it at a 10,000 foot view, and then look at like on the ground, so to speak, or on the water. And I really feel that, like there are examples, for example, Severn mentioned oyster farms. Oyster farms tend, most of them in Maine are very close together. They tend to be in estuaries. They tend to be close to where people live. They're really pushing the limit of social license for aquaculture. Our farm is in 100 feet of water. We have no riparian landowners near our farms, so we don't even have to notice them really. We just notice the town and stuff. But we get regulated just like we're a oyster farm in Harpswell or something. Cook, finfish is a different form of aquaculture and requires its own set of management and monitoring, which is totally different. I sometimes feel, and I could be wrong on this, but I feel that DMR, which is Division of Marine Resources in Maine, is not really up to or even mandated to properly manage finfish farms. I do feel that they are doing the best they can do, but I know that what's happening now is you have this proliferation of LPAs. There's close to 700 LPAs, limited purpose aquaculture licenses in Maine. I mean, how can you manage that number and that diverse a group? I mean, it's very difficult. So what's happening is you're getting these very reactive regulations. You're getting a lot of folks, organizations that are pushing back on aquaculture, and it's really putting the industry at risk. And I think the public good. If we overregulate, like when you overregulate aquaculture, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We shouldn't be like overregulating seaweed farms. We shouldn't be overregulating urchin farms or scallop farms. The oyster farms are a unique
Playing from Mac Studio.
Are a unique situation, to be honest with you, because they are, the Dharmascotta River. I mean, you can't paddle up the Dharmascotta River. I mean, you don't have to paddle. You can walk up the river on oyster cages. But in the meantime, that really hurts like people down east. I've advocated a long time that there should be different regulations for down east than southern Maine or eastern Maine, western Maine. Anyway, the bottom line is I think no one likes regulation unless it does what your agenda is. So unfortunately, I just don't think that's a good system. And I think Severn alluded to the fact that we should have a policy. We should have an adult in the room that says, look, this type of aquaculture is different than this type of aquaculture. Aquaculture in a highly, built out and developed area is different than aquaculture in a less developed and more wild and pristine environment, and we don't have that. And the forces that are pushing that, unfortunately, are pushing it to, they're really focused on what's happening in Western Maine in this highly dense population of oyster farms. And, if you look at Casco Bay, there's so many farms. I understand why people are like, what's going on? But when you come up here, there aren't that many farms, So we need an adult in the room. We need a process. I don't know what that is. And I think a lot of people are afraid if we try to empower or create an adult in the room that they would actually be an adult and impose rules and regulations that make sense. But whenever you impose rules or regulations, somebody gets hurt. Somebody's industry, somebody's business is hurt. And so I think, we're a little bit in a catch-22.
Great. Thanks so much, Trey. I think we've got time for just a couple more questions. I see Sebastian's got his hand raised. Sebastian?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, Severin, for hosting another interesting and informative session. Just a couple of comments. First and foremost, the regulations and environmental monitoring for finfish are different than shellfish. They have been for 30 years in the state of Maine. And when the state of Maine was delegated under the Clean Water Act as a delegated state, the environmental monitoring was transferred from DMR, which had been doing it for 20 years, to DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, as they should have been. And those regulations were stiffened. So the regulations in the state of Maine have consistently gotten stricter and stricter over the last 45 years. The other point I guess I'd like to make, and Trey, I'd like to just disagree a little bit with you. What has changed in Maine is not the farms themselves, but the communities around the farms that have gentrified. And it is ironic that the kind of mantra here is Mainers for Mainers, when Severin, you've actually invited everybody from outside the state or the country to comment on Maine aquaculture. And I think the reality is Mainers have been engaging in a very energetic policy discussion for 45 years in the state of Maine. We've had over 10 task forces that have included not just industry people, but fishermen, tourism, conservation organizations, ENGOs, and they have developed the existing state of regulations and policy, and those are the product of a very energetic public discussion that has happened. Maine aquaculture in Maine is very different than the kinds of places that Don has operated, and we're proud of that, frankly. We were the first farmers in the world to do third-party biosecurity audits. We were the first farmers in the world to do comprehensive bay management systems. We were the first farmers in the world to do a code of containment and a code of conduct. We have a long history of doing things, and probably most importantly and most relevant to a lot of this discussion is many of those codes that were developed starting in the early 90s then became the basis for the international seaweed and seafood certification program. So if you look at the certification programs like Global Gap, like ASC, like a couple of the other programs, they often lifted word for word out of the Maine aquaculture best management practice documents and built those into their certification programs. So we as a sector, I think, welcome criticism. We're certainly getting our fair share of it now. Most of that is being funded by people who did not grow up in those communities and frankly are not connected to working waterfronts. And the biggest challenge in my mind that Maine faces as a state is how are we going to adapt coastal communities to preserve working waterfronts, and what role will aquaculture play in that? And if you look at the traditional fisheries in Maine, virtually all of them are restricted entry fisheries. And so it's very, very difficult for a young person coming out of a traditional working waterfront family to continue that family tradition. And there's a reason why we have over 200 people in the state of Maine, and this number is increasing every year, that own a commercial fishing license and an aquaculture lease. And Trey, your work has been really important in that, in reaching out to some of those commercial fishing families and helping them understand the difference between aquaculture and wild hunting, and giving them training so that they can have a better chance of being successful in that field. And I wholeheartedly agree with you, Trey, around the inappropriate role of venture capital, and also the need to help people understand the full value chain as opposed to just the farming piece of the production exercise. I think that is hugely important, and we certainly here at the association spend a lot of time focusing on that with new farmers as well. So thanks for the opportunity, Severin, and interesting discussion.
Great. I'm going to take maybe one, maybe two more. I know we've had some difficulty with Crystal. Do you have a question? I know you were.
I don't have a question. I have a comment about what Sebastian just said. There's a couple of things. Cook Aquaculture is a $4 billion company in revenues a year. So when we talk about local ownership, we must remember that Cook and its CEO, Glenn Cook, have already said they're a $4 billion company. This is a David versus Goliath fight without question. And in terms of regulations in Maine and how strict they are around finfish only, it would be an amazing thing to see Cook Aquaculture and Sebastian Bell advocate for putting an ROV under those net pens, because more than 2 decades ago, they did away with the state diving program, so you have no independent verification. Cook dives under its own pens. I would love to see them get out there and advocate this next legislative session for some independent verification. I think that would go a long way.
Say we'd be glad to do that if you stop advocating for a moratorium, Crystal.
Oh, this could be really efficient. We could start.
But one has nothing to do with the other, Sebastian. Just prove what's under those net pens independently.
Great. We have time for one more question. Josh Bernier?
Oh, yeah. So Josh Bernier here, health and safety representative for Cook Aquaculture. I just have some general comments, I guess. In terms of the speakers present, Trey, thank you for being the voice of reason with respect to the idea of collaboration, because in the climate that we're seeing today, especially in the United States, this culture of division and just one extreme to the next and everything else, it has no place anymore. The two-party system, along with everybody's extreme two-sided opinions on we need to be able to collaborate more, and we need to be able to find a balance, because it's not all or nothing. And what you said has resonated more than anything else. I guess that's it. I would encourage, we employ 230 people in the state of Maine, 175 people in Washington County, the poorest county in Maine. These are jobs that provide full-time benefits and income to people who otherwise would have to depend on part-time or seasonal income. I know that it's not all about money. I understand that animal welfare needs to be at the forefront. I care about animals. I studied aquaculture in college, and I had an emphasis on conservational aquaculture, so I understand the environmental impact that we have and our responsibility for stewardship with the environment. Are we perfect? No. Are we better than we were 20 years ago? Absolutely. Are we going to continue to improve? Yes. And that's all that we can do in Maine, is to do the best that we can with the resources that we have. And yes, to Crystal's point, Cook Aquaculture is a globally operated company, and we have $4 billion of revenue globally. All of our farms in Maine are operated, no, they're not owned by Maine employees. That would just be a lie. But they're all operated by Maine residents, Maine employees, people. And these businesses you're talking about, if hypothetically you're successful in shutting down the entire salmon farming industry in Maine, then, good on you. Okay. You got what you wanted. But unless you have 230 full-time jobs with benefits lined up and a way to help the local economy recover in a situation like that, then you haven't thought enough about it. And so I would suggest that we move more towards a culture and a goal of collaboration and just a way to find out how we can coexist in a fashion, because Maine is very much a state built around community values, teamwork, and collaboration. So I fully believe that Maine residents and that we'll find a way to get it done. So I'm all for collaboration. Thank you for the opportunity to speak and attend. I thank you very much.
Thank you. And we're, as a moment of time here, Severin, I'll let you close it out.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you for everyone who came for the Zoom or in person. I wanted to remind you the next session is going to be at the Eastport Library. Peter O'Neill is speaking with Andy Kimbrell, Lavinia Courier or Andy Kimbrell. I'm not sure which of them. And then we have another one at the end of July with the Passamaquoddy Marine Office and Passamaquoddy Baykeeper speakers. So you can see all those on the Greenhorns /events. We also have something I wanted to invite anyone who wants to come. Just every time there's a low tides, we, Smithereen Farm and Greenhorns, host low tides to allow anybody to come into the subtidal ecosystem and see the seaweed and learn about seaweed. So this coming week is, again, low tides, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday we'll be out. If you'd like to come along, there's also chefs coming to work with Japanese cuisine. So, we welcome the dialogue in a constructive way and an inclusive way. Thank you, everyone, for your interest. Thank you, Ashley, for bearing the Zoom. And thank you, Lubeck Library.